sad story with a sad regime. A broken country with a broken dream. Brother and sister, neighbour and friend, die holding one another, no hint to the end. Fears are indelible, fine, spiralling spray. The sweet smell of almonds or newly mown hay. The bears are growling and the eagles soar, watching shivering streets lined with blood and gore. The petals of jasmine are scattered awry, all pray to the east while children just cry.
When you do look into the First World War and you see and hear men's stories, it must have been absolutely horrific. Tales of bodies in the trenches and you're stepping on them to get to the parapet to go over the top, you know.
To quite often certain death.
Oh, yes, yeah. The 1st of July, Battle of the Somme, will go down in history. Well, it has gone down in history as the biggest defeat of the British Army ever. Over 57,000 men were killed on that day, British men. And for a week before, the generals and colonels thought that a bombardment would help to soften the enemy up. So they bombarded the enemy lines with 1.5 million shells in 7 days, because they thought that it would be a complete walkover after that, you see, the British generals. And what happened was, when they found out in the end that the Germans had survived, mainly because they went underground.
Right.
They went deep underground. And so...
so it was just completely ineffective?
Very much so. And then the other thing was that whenever the British went over the top, the junior officers blew a whistle. The trenches were only 300 or 400 yards apart. You could hear these whistles, of course.
And so they knew they were coming?
They knew they were coming, yeah. And over the top they went, and they were machine gunned row on row. And the other thing, of course, was that they expected it to be a complete walkover, the British generals. And of course the men were carrying all the possessions. They were trying to charge trenches with fixed bayonets with a full pack on. And facing them were several German machine gun nests, which just mowed them down, line after line after line. When they realised, apparently they burst into tears, the colonels and the generals. They were so upset about it.
That contrasts with what you quite often hear, is that the officers just didn't care and just kept, just one wave of men went down, they sent another wave after.
I think they did care. They underestimated the value of this 1.5 million shells over 7 days. I mean, that must have been horrific itself.
And to live with that decision, as much as you go over the stiff upper lip and all that.
Oh,
yeah.
So your dad served in the First World War, is that right?
He was 18, he joined the First World War. He had a gunshot wound in the back of his head, which I think was shot with a sniper.
Right.
And he was at the Passendale Ridge, which was the biggest artillery battle, to my knowledge, ever. And he had the middle of his right hand blown away, and earliest forms of plastic surgery, which was done at the Birmingham Hospital, where they take them from Afghanistan.
Yeah, the old military
now.
hospital. Yeah.
And you know, he was a nice guy, really, and I think his experiences with the First World War definitely had some influence on that. I think, you know, the effects of seeing kids shot, like 30,000 in the morning and all that kind of thing. Well, when I joined the Air Force, there was thousands and thousands of aircrew redundant, and like any kid, you all wanted to fly, but there was no chance because they've got thousands of them. I had loads of mates like who had been, one mate of mine had been a navigator, a lad from Liverpool. One of my officers was a Pathfinder flight engineer. Another one was a flight engineer who was an absolute wreck. And I never thought much of the Air Force the way they treated them, because they gradually reduced them in rank, because most of the aircrew ranks were acting ranks. And then they were gradually reduced to what the rank actually was. And they just never treated them right at all. They didn't bother with them. There's more respect for them now than ever there was then. This one guy I knew, he was a complete nervous wreck. And where he should have been having treatment, he wasn't.
After what he'd done in the war?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because people don't understand the casualty rate in Bomber Command was the highest of any of the forces. The only one that come anywhere near that was the Merchant Navy. They had 57% casualty rate. There was about 112,000 aircrew and 55,000 of them were killed.
My earliest memory living in the Republic of Ireland was that I didn't have a grandfather, and nobody ever spoke about the fact that he had been in the First World War. My grandmother never spoke about him, my mother never spoke about him. For some reason he enlisted early in 1915 in the 6th Royal Dublin Fusiliers. We don't know why he enlisted, because he had a wife and 6 young children. He had a full employment, and there was no conscription in Ireland. The only reason we think he may have done so was to further Home Rule in Ireland. There was the 10th Irish Division and the 16th Irish Division who fought in the First World War, who were all nationalist Irishmen, because they went on the promise that if they returned to get Home Rule. He came to Basingstoke, May 1915, obviously on a training session, and on the 9th of July they embarked for Gallipoli, and they were stationed at Sea Beach, Suvla Bay, from the 7th of August until they were withdrawn on the 30th of September that year, 1915. Then, while the Greek government were trying to decide whether to go with the Allies or to go with the Germans, 3 French divisions and the 10th Irish Division occupied Salonika, and of course my grandfather was in the 10th Irish Division. And they fought against the Bulgarians until the autumn of 1917. Unfortunately, just before they moved to Palestine, my grandfather was wounded, and he died in Salonika on the 8th of September 1917. 3 years virtually to the day in Ireland, Republicans burnt down the Royal Irish Constabulary Barracks and took the arms that were there. And the reaction from what were the British forces in Ireland at the time was typical. You had the Black and Tans and the auxiliaries, who were supposedly a police force. They raided the town, ransacked the town, burnt the town hall, and beat up the people in the town, basically, and that's how they used to react to Republican actions against them. When it came to, they came round to my grandmother's house. They threw the furniture out into the street. The guy in charge then saw the only photograph there is of my grandfather on the mantelpiece in uniform. And when he was told that he died 3 years earlier fighting with the British Army, they left. But my grandmother felt that she had to do the same as everybody else in her street, which was to flee into the countryside for several nights, find shelter where they could, until the troops, the so-called police, had left the town, finished ransacking the town. Her fear there was that if she stayed where she was and her stuff was left alone, she would be treated as some sort of collaborator with these British forces. So it had changed from my grandfather being a British soldier to my grandmother being afraid of having anything to do with the British Army or the British forces.
I was a machine gunner in the Cheshire Regiment, 2nd Battalion Cheshire Regiment, yeah. I joined up at Chester. I was 14, yeah, and now 93. I went 3 times up and down the desert chasing Rommel, yeah. Of course, he was knocking us back, like, you know, and then we would knock him back up the desert, like, you know, yeah.
Did you fear for your life? Did you fear for yourself?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's only about, 16 or something like that. The worst memory is when we was cut off. Yeah. We couldn't get no rations or nothing through. In North Africa, one month it was, about a month. Had a few bad times round Tobruk, getting Tobruk back, like, you know, when Jenny had it, yeah. You couldn't move very far unless you dug in, like, you know, yeah. Because Jerry's was there all the time. Traces at you. You could see him missing the sand, like, you know, yeah. Actually was ready to give up, we were. But, like I say, the RAF came, dive bombing them, shifted the Jerry out of it, yeah.
That must have been a big relief.
Oh, when we used to see the planes, squadrons coming over, RAF, one after the other, tracing bullets, like, you know, yeah. And we used to watch them there, then we used to go off again, like it, yeah. And that's how we got relieved, yeah. I lost a few mates there, round Tobruk, I did. And I was lucky to get away with it. And I think the reason I got away with being small, like, you know, yeah. Yeah. But I lost a few mates there, all right, yeah. And then there. Yes, there's somebody bad times. Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be here, I am, definitely. Yeah.
Apparently you used to work on the Wellington bombers. You used to build the Wellington bombers, is that right?
Yes.
And what did you do exactly with them?
Well, I worked with the carpenters, and we used to get on the fuselage. We worked on them when they were in the early stage, like. And I had a little set of steps, and I'd got a toolbox, and my father had a toolbox made for me, yes, and I'd got tools, and we had to, and the girl that I worked with, we had to climb up onto the fuselage, and we had to put these long strips of wood on, and I had a screwdriver, and you had to pump them in.
To put the frame together?
Yes, and get all the screws and everything in, yes.
Great stuff.
Yes.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, because I was only quite young and slim, like in those days, and I could get quite on top, and yes, I made a success of it.
Brilliant. Well, I've brought you a little gift, actually. I've managed to find this.
Oh, have you?
Which is the Vickers Wellington Haynes Manual. So I thought that might be nice for you to have a look through.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
So was it the actual frame that the aircraft...
Yes, I worked on the fuselage, and we worked underneath. We had to put a bomb floor in, and we had to sit on the floor a lot. Yes, we'd worked right up to the end.
Fantastic.
And then I was made redundant, yes. I was one of the first, because I was the first on the aircraft to work on it.
It must have been a lot of pressure. The aircraft had to be completed quite quickly,
Oh,
didn't
yes,
it? It must have been a lot of pressure on.
I worked in, I think they called it C4, I worked with. And then when it had to go out of C4, the men, the maintenance men, used to come and take them on trolleys, and they went up into C6 then, and then they continued doing other things on the aircraft then. We'd finished. We started on another one then.
I went to Bailey when I was 18, and I worked at first on what you call the jigs. That was the beginning of the bomber. After that I was moved to what they had like a sewing room. The planes, they're not what you think. They were covered with like a material, the outside. And my job, and another lady that was with me, used to put like a black rubber around the turret doors so the light wouldn't get in. But if they were out on a raid, anything, it used to tear. And we used to have to go and put a patch on it. But they did cover the material up with what we call dope. And that was to stiffen it. But that was our job, was to go and put patches on. And I once they sent me over to the aerodrome itself to put what we call spats round the wheels, round the, you know, the things that the wheels are on. What we call spats, and put them on. And we used to see the pilots used to come into the factory ready to take the bombers up for trial. And I remember one of them got killed, come down. The worst was when they had the pilotless planes, the doodle bugs we call them, you know. We didn't like that. I was working at Bailey, they used to fly over there, but I never remembered one dropping there. But that did frighten us because there was nobody in the plane, they just came over. I remember we had to go into the air raid shelter there, but we were there that long, it was nearly midnight. So eventually they let us come home. And I remember me and another lady walking across a field from Rudheath to Northwich, which was a pretty good way then. And they were having this air fight. And there was shrapnel dropping everywhere. And we were scared because we were walking along this field and that. And it was terrible, it was horrendous. Because you could see everywhere lighting up and in the sky, you know. And
there were bits falling to the ground.
Oh, yeah. That was bad. I remember that very well. It was very scary.
You always think about the people back home at the time, you know, my parents and my fiancée at the time, you know, and that's the people you sort of worry about as opposed to yourself. You don't really...
You're thinking about
them and how they feel, and absolutely, you just sort of get on with it, really.
Yeah. Would you say that, I mean, obviously you said you served for 25 years.
Yeah.
From where you started to when you finished and to now, what do you think your opinions on war? I know it's a very general term, but have things changed for you in a way?
Well, it has. You don't think about that when you join the military. You know, it's a job and you go out to support your family, whatever. But then you get involved with it and you deploy out and you do stuff. Some of it I agree with, some of it I don't agree with. You know, the politics of it. As you get older, you get a bit wiser to it all.
Yeah.
And some stuff I don't agree with. You know, and certain elements of the Falklands I didn't agree with, and Afghanistan. But that's why I joined, to serve my country and do what I was there to do, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How do you think the public's relationship to war has changed over the years? It's difficult, I think, when you're in the military, you kind of get that disconnection sometimes, but what do you think has changed with...
Yeah, it's definitely changed. Certainly the media side of it's changed. When I was in Kuwait, you know, when K-80 pitches up, you know, something's got to happen, you know, it's going to go downhill from there. But as you sat in the front line and the aircraft are there, a bus pitches up, and 20, 30 journalists get off with their film, and they're filming you. And you never got that back in the day, you know. But nowadays it's everywhere, and people see what's going on.
Yeah.
You get interviewed for papers
with all the
and
YouTube
television
releases and things
Absolutely.
like everything's recorded, isn't it?
Yeah.
And does that change the way you feel about what you're doing out there, or does it make you think about people back home more because you know that they're aware of it?
They are aware of it, and sometimes you don't really want them to be aware of it because some of the stuff you're doing, you don't want them to to know what you're doing, really. You know, if you've been bombed or shot at, you don't really want people back home to know that.
Yeah.
And it is pretty instant nowadays, and the telephones and the internet, and they know pretty much straight away what's going on.
Yeah.
But then again, it can be a good thing that they're aware of what you're doing.
And what about a toughest memory, maybe, if you don't mind sharing anything like that with us?
Leaving's always the tough one.
Yeah.
You know, when you get on the aircraft at Brize Norton or Lynham,
Yeah.
and your loved one's standing there crying, and you've got to get on and away you go. And you know, it's for 4 months, 6 months, whatever.
And I suppose
But then
that's-
once you're away, it's countdown to come back again.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that's it.
Yeah. I suppose that's something that never changes, is it? With war, that there's always going to be that goodbye.
Of course there is.
And that wait.
And that's the hard thing, the drive to the destination. You know, to Brize Norton to fly off or
Yeah,
wherever
exactly.
you're going. Yeah.
I can remember when I first went out to Afghanistan, there was a good deal of hostility, almost towards the military, it felt like. We received parcels from well-wishers that had served in previous conflicts, particularly, notably. I can remember one gentleman used to send us parcels every week, and these people really stood out because they'd write to you and just tell them a little bit about themselves and what they were up to. And then the next time I went back, about 5 years later, there was a big change. The public swung around behind us and there was real support for what we were doing. And I can remember that feeling, an almost more American sort of support for the troops.
Is there any moment that it stands out that was maybe something that you found particularly tough to deal with?
One particular incident, we were called to the hospital in Camp Bastion just to help out, and it was 11 children, all under the age of 7, I'd say, all very badly injured from a blast, and they were being used as a human shield by the Taliban, and NATO didn't know, so they got injured. Lots of the moments, often they're private moments when you're sitting looking across the desert and you think the marvellous, the desert's a beautiful place. Afghanistan's an amazing place, really, and then you reflect. But for me, it's small things. I can picture individual soldiers. I can picture looking down their body and seeing their foot looking back at me the wrong way. It's little things like that that come back to my mind often.
So your son's a cadet, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, he's a cadet. Yeah.
And do you think he'll join up?
It's one of the options. He's talking about doing an apprenticeship in Civvy Street first, and yeah, I think he might well do. Yeah, and it's something I'd encourage because training in the military is very good. I think he's looking to be more technical like yourself, and I think it's ideal for a youngster to know where they want to go.
Well, when you're a young chap, you're filled with sort of ideology, aren't you, and the glamour of everything, you know.
When you're younger, war is war. There's nothing, you don't think about anything beyond that. And I think as you get older and you realise what a waste the whole thing is. I mean, there shouldn't be a war, but realistically, it's going to happen.
We was fighting for out in the bloody desert for something was not there, sort of thing, you know. Yeah.
I wonder sometimes if there'll ever be another war with us in any case. I do wonder about that.
Like a big world war?
Yeah, I do wonder about that because I think now, because I've got grandchildren now, naturally, you don't want it to happen to them.
Complete and utter waste of time. It's only kids that get killed in war. Politicians, they don't get killed, it's the kids. It's all a waste of time.